I was working in my home office again today. The autumn sunlight streaming through the large windows gently illuminated the coffee cup on my desk. This house in Greenwich's upscale neighborhood was one we chose together with Thomas after our marriage. It was the perfect location for both my husband, who commuted to Manhattan, and for me as a freelance graphic designer. I remember when I first met Thomas at the Yale alumni reunion 3 years ago. I was instantly captivated by his gentle demeanor and intellectual air. 6 months later, he proposed to me at a lovely restaurant overlooking Central Park. The happiness I felt at that moment remains vivid in my memory. While making final adjustments to the logo design on my screen, I unconsciously placed my hand on my belly. 8 months pregnant. Expecting our first child, my life seemed wrapped in perfect happiness. For us, who had been hoping for a baby during our 3 years of marriage, this pregnancy was truly something we had been longing for. "Margaret, are you feeling all right?" I turned to find my mother-in-law Helen standing in the office doorway with a concerned expression. Lately, she's been checking on me frequently in preparation for the birth. Her figure, dressed in a high-end two-piece suit, exuded upper-class elegance. "Yes, I'm fine. Helen, thank you for always looking after me." Though I didn't show it in my expression, I felt slightly breathless. Helen's kindness was almost too perfect, and sometimes I felt pressured by her excessive attentiveness. But I understood it was her way of showing affection. I couldn't refuse anything, whether it was the weekly church rides or shopping trips for baby preparations. "I heard from the lawyer about your grandfather's inheritance. Everything seems to be proceeding smoothly." The inheritance. About $20 million. While it wasn't particularly important to me, I had noticed subtle changes in people's attitudes lately. Thomas, in particular, seemed oddly unsettled whenever the inheritance was mentioned. Despite his sufficient income as an executive at his real estate development company, I could glimpse what seemed like anxiety in him. When Thomas returned home in the evening, I had just finished preparing dinner. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of herb-roasted chicken, seasonal salad, and soup. "I'm home. Welcome back. You're quite late today. A new project started, and Jessica is preparing the necessary documents." Every time I heard Jessica's name, something bothered me. But I told myself it was just a pregnant woman's oversensitive emotions. Lately, I seemed to be hearing her name more often, and it made me somewhat uneasy. After dinner, I was checking the nursery preparations. The small bed, soft-colored wallpaper, lovely mobile, everything was in place. Though Thomas initially objected to an all-pink room, he eventually accepted my opinion. The baby clothes we chose at Macy's were already neatly arranged in the closet. This weekend, church friends are planning to throw me a baby shower. I'm truly grateful for the community's warm support. Sister Mary is even planning the details of the baby's baptism. Lying in bed, I talk to my baby. I feel boundless love for my child moving energetically in my womb. We'll meet soon. Mommy is so looking forward to meeting you. That night was colder than usual. The trees had shed their leaves, and the shadows of street trees could be seen in the moonlight. Before going to sleep, I checked the baby's room. Tomorrow's schedule included the final childbirth preparation class in the morning, followed by a meeting with Sister Mary about the baptism. I awoke to sudden, severe pain in the middle of the night. Still only 36 weeks. There should have been another month until the due date. The contractions were stronger than anything I'd felt before. Thomas. My voice calling for my husband trembled with pain. My husband, who should have been sleeping beside me, was gone. When I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand, there was a message: important meeting came up. Staying at a hotel. These late-night business trips had been increasing lately. I didn't even have the luxury to question it now. The labor-like pains gradually grew closer together. As I was debating whether to call an ambulance, the doorbell rang. Though I hesitated for a moment at the late-night visitor, Helen was standing on the other side of the door, still in her expensive nightgown, as if she had been waiting. I had a bad feeling and came to check on you. Later, I would remember how unnatural my mother-in-law's expression seemed at that moment. Her perfume smelled stronger than usual. In the ambulance, my consciousness was hazy. By the time we arrived at Greenwich Hospital, the contractions were just minutes apart. Mrs. Wilson, will prepare for an emergency C-section. The middle-aged doctor in the white coat announced this with an oddly calm demeanor, as if everything had been arranged beforehand. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of a young nurse trying to say something before being stopped by her senior. Clear anxiety was visible in her eyes. But at that moment, I had no room to consider these oddities. The operating room was unusually quiet. The usual sounds of medical equipment and staff voices seemed strangely muted. As the anesthesia took effect, I could hear the medical staff whispering. "Is everything ready?" "Yes, according to plan." Fragmentary conversations echoed in my consciousness. The fluorescent lights gradually blurred. And then I sank into complete darkness. When I opened my eyes, my husband and mother-in-law were standing in the hospital room. It was already bright outside, with morning sunlight streaming through the window. Thomas was in a suit, looking somewhat restless as he gazed out the window. "The baby?" At my question, the air in the hospital room froze. Only the sound of the Ford dripping marked the silence. "I'm sorry," the doctor quietly announced. "Your child, due to complications during delivery." It took a moment to understand the meaning of those words. They echoed in my head. Complications. Death. It didn't feel real. No, that can't be true. At my cry, Thomas lowered his eyes. He nervously fingered his expensive tie. Helen embraced me while crying, but somehow that embrace felt oddly formal. As if it had been rehearsed. "Let me see my baby, please let me see them." "That's not possible right now." "Already." The doctor's words trailed off. At that moment, I thought I heard a baby crying in the hallway. But perhaps that was my imagination. The following days were like a nightmare. The hospital issued a death certificate, and the funeral home was arranged. I couldn't even see my baby before the small coffin was covered with earth. Ironically, the day of the funeral was sunny, with the church's stained glass casting rainbow-colored light. Thomas was increasingly consumed by work, and his visits to the hospital room grew shorter. I noticed him checking his smartphone more frequently, and several times saw incoming calls with what sounded like a woman's voice. Instead, Helen stayed by my side, providing almost excessive care. On sleepless nights, I thought I could hear a baby crying. Was it an auditory hallucination, or 3 months after discharge, I continued to rest at home. Diagnosed with PTSD, I was taking antidepressants. The white pills in the red bottle had become part of my new life. Thomas came home later and later, and his weekend outings for work increased. I chose to turn a blind eye to the unfamiliar perfume that faintly lingered on his clothes. One day, I received a call from an acquaintance who had spotted Thomas's car in Manhattan's restaurant district. That day, he was supposed to be in Boston for an important business trip. The photo also showed the back of a young woman sitting in the passenger seat. Just as I was about to investigate the truth, that phone call came. When my iPhone started ringing, the clock showed 2 p.m. The number was from Greenwich Hospital. At first, I hesitated to answer. Calls from that hospital always disturbed my heart. But on the fourth ring, I picked up the receiver. A chill ran down my spine. Mrs. Wilson. I'm terribly sorry, but there's something urgent I need to discuss with you. A young woman's voice. Somehow familiar. Similar to the nurse who had tried to say something in the operating room that time. Mom, don't leave your baby behind. Please come pick her up right away. Those words stopped my world. My hands shook, nearly dropping the cell phone. What? My baby died right after birth. As I answered with a trembling voice, the other person hurriedly continued, lowering her voice as if sensing footsteps behind her. There's something I need to tell you about the delivery that day. Could you come to the hospital? I'm Amy Thompson. The young nurse who had tried to say something in the operating room that day. The moment I heard her name, I felt a shock like electricity coursing through my body. Pieces of memory started connecting one by one. I'll wait at the staff entrance, the back door, in 30 minutes. Please don't tell anyone, especially your mother-in-law. After the call ended, I stood still for a long time. Outside the window, spring sunlight brightly illuminated the world, as if unaware of what was about to unfold. The magnolia in the garden wafted a gentle fragrance. I put on a khaki jacket and grabbed my bag. My reflection in the mirror seemed to have regained vitality for the first time in 3 months. My steps toward the entrance were the most certain they'd been in 3 months. Something big was about to happen. When I parked my car behind Greenwich Hospital, the spring sunlight was already starting to slant. In a corner of the staff parking lot, I chose an inconspicuous spot to park. I noticed my expression in the rearview mirror was surprisingly calm. As I started walking toward the back entrance, a young woman in a white coat hurriedly approached. Mrs. Wilson. Amy Thompson called out in a low voice, scanning the surroundings cautiously. This way. Following her lead, we entered an unused conference room. Through the window, I could see the twilight sky, and distant sirens could be heard. First, there's something I want to show you. Amy took out a tablet and played a video. It showed what happened in the operating room that night. After I lost consciousness from the anesthesia. A healthy cry. Nurses' hurried movements. And the baby was definitely born. A healthy baby girl. My hand started trembling. Then why? That night, I was a rookie nurse on night shift. But I felt something was different from a normal delivery. The behavior of Dr. Morrison, the head of obstetrics, the prepared documents, everything felt unnatural. Amy took a deep breath and continued. The baby was transferred to another hospital. Yale New Haven Hospital. There's a pediatrician there who knows your mother-in-law. As I listened to her story, fragmented memories started connecting in my mind. Thomas's absence. Helen's unnatural behavior. The doctor's demeanor. Everything started to make sense. But why until now? I was scared. Amy's voice trembled. Dr. Morrison silenced me, and when I expressed my concerns, I was assigned to night shifts only. But my conscience couldn't bear it. At that moment, footsteps were heard in the hallway. Amy hurriedly handed me a stack of documents. These are the evidence. Birth records, transfer records, and the sound of the door opening. Amy, there you are. A senior nurse peeked in. A slight wariness showed in her expression. I'm sorry. I'll return to the treatment room now. Amy gave me a small nod and left the room. In my car, I looked through the documents with trembling hands. Birth certificate. DNA test results. And another shocking document. The pregnancy record of Thomas's subordinate, Jessica Parker. 3 months pregnant. The next day, I hired a private investigator. His investigation revealed even more shocking facts. Thomas and Jessica's affair had been going on for 3 years. Helen had known about it from the beginning. Rather, she had seen Jessica as the ideal daughter-in-law, saying she had better family background and upbringing. And when my inheritance talks started to materialize, they made a plan. Kill my baby and push me to a mental breakdown. Then Thomas would gain control of the inheritance. They chose this method over divorce to maintain appearances. And with Jessica's pregnancy, they had planned to script it as a husband overcoming grief and remarrying. On my way to Yale New Haven Hospital, I pulled over to the shoulder. Tears blurred my vision. Anger, sadness, or relief. Emotions welled up intensely. My cell phone rang. It was Helen. Margaret, where are you? I'm preparing dinner. Now I could clearly hear the calculation hidden behind that voice. Sorry. Just doing some shopping. There was no need to pretend anymore. I was going to meet my real baby. The documents recorded that she had been named Emma. Emma. My precious daughter. By the time I arrived at Yale New Haven Hospital, the sun had completely set. When I mentioned the doctor's name, Amy had told me, after a moment's hesitation, I was guided to the pediatric ward. There, I met her. A small angel sleeping in an incubator. Eyes the same color as mine. A nose bridge reminiscent of Thomas. Undeniably, our daughter. There was no need to wait for DNA test results. Maternal instincts told the whole story. When her tiny hand firmly gripped my finger, my resolve was set. I will protect this child, no matter what. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number. Hello, is this the Greenwich Police Department? I'd like to report a kidnapping. Outside the window, a new night was beginning. The battle ahead would not be easy. But there was no turning back. Looking at Emma's sleeping face, I made a vow in my heart. Until the truth comes to light, and until justice is served, I will never give up. With my hand on the incubator, I quietly shed tears. No longer tears of sorrow. These were tears of a new beginning. The interrogation room at the Greenwich Police Department was brighter than I had imagined. Please tell me everything again, from the beginning. Detective Sarah Miller from the Criminal Investigation Department quietly urged, placing a warm coffee in front of me. In her eyes, the woman in her mid-50s showed a motherly kindness. Next to me, hastily arranged lawyer James Carter nodded while taking notes. Yes. I'll tell you everything. I took a deep breath and began spreading out the bundle of evidence. The operating room footage Amy had filmed. Inconsistencies in birth records. Records from Yale New Haven Hospital. And the vast amount of evidence gathered by the private investigator. This is clearly a conspiracy. Lawyer Carter said with a stern expression. Detective Miller nodded sharply at those words. Kidnapping of a baby, forging a death certificate, attempted insurance fraud, and... The interrogation room door opened, and a young detective hurriedly entered. The DNA test results are in. Detective Miller reviewed the report and quietly smiled. It's conclusive. Let's request the arrest warrants. That evening, events moved rapidly. First, Dr. Morrison was arrested at his workplace. His arrest during afternoon rounds sent shockwaves through the hospital. His confession revealed many more involved parties. Large hush money payments. Forged documents. And Helen's influence. Next was Jessica Parker. She was arrested as she left the company. Colleagues watched in shock as she was handcuffed in her designer suit. It was all for love. That's what she reportedly repeated in the interrogation room. However, her cell phone revealed numerous emails proving detailed inheritance investigations and plans. Thomas's arrest came late that night. Margaret, what is this all about? He shouted while being handcuffed at our front door. But his voice already carried the color of defeat. Helen was last. I was only thinking of my son's happiness. When arrested in her luxury home's reception room, she maintained her elegant demeanor. However, her eyes revealed the despair of a collapsed plan. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Tension filled the courtroom. Lead prosecutor Diana Hawkins began her relentless pursuit. The defendants committed crimes far beyond mere kidnapping. This was attempted murder, fraud, and above all, the heinous act of stealing a child from its mother. Amy's testimony as a witness froze the courtroom. When the baby was born in the operating room, I clearly heard her cry. She was a healthy girl. But Dr. Morrison immediately moved her to another room, and after that, the jurors nodded deeply at her courageous testimony. The defense's cross-examination couldn't overturn the truth. The evidence was overwhelming. Amy's video footage, hospital records, witness testimonies, and above all, the irrefutable DNA evidence. On the final day of the week-long trial, the judge solemnly delivered the verdict. The defendant Thomas Wilson is sentenced to 8 years in prison. The defendant Helen Wilson is sentenced to 5 years in prison. The defendant Jessica Parker is sentenced to 3 years in prison, suspended for 5 years. A sigh of relief drifted through the courtroom. However, this wasn't the end. Civil lawsuits followed. Claims for damages. Compensation claims. And most importantly, establishing custody rights. The court grants sole custody of Emma Wilson to her biological mother, Margaret Wilson. When the judgment was handed down, I smiled softly. Next to me were my mother's arms, holding Emma. She was already 4 months old. Her growing smile continues to heal my heart. As we descended the courthouse steps, reporters had gathered. I stopped quietly and answered while holding Emma. We're starting a new life. Together with Emma. As I spoke, I had reliable allies beside me. Detective Miller, Lawyer Carter, and Amy. Without their support, this battle might not have been won. The evening sky was turning beautiful colors. Tomorrow, new battles would begin. But there was nothing to fear anymore. Emma's small hand was firmly gripping my finger. This warmth is the source of all courage. On the way home, watching Emma sleeping peacefully in the car, I was thinking. Life sometimes presents unimaginable trials. But there's always light beyond those trials. When we arrived home, there was a bouquet placed in front of the porch. It was from the church community. The card read, "Justice always prevails. May your new life with Emma be filled with blessings." It was approaching a year since we left Greenwich and moved to our new home. A quiet residential area in Westchester, a comfortable distance from Manhattan. In the garden, there's a small swing set installed as Emma's playground. On weekends, the laughter of neighborhood children echoes. "Margaret, would you like some coffee?" Sunday afternoon, Amy came to visit. She had quit nursing and now works in medical malpractice prevention. She's a core member of Angels of Justice, an organization established in the wake of our case. "Thank you. When Emma wakes up, let's have tea time together." In the corner of the living room where I set up my workspace, materials for new projects are spread out. The graphic design work has become busier than before. Particularly, requests for logos and brochure designs from victim support organizations have increased. "There's an update on the trial," Amy says, showing me her tablet. "Other cases involving Dr. Morrison have come to light, and new investigations have begun. Thanks to our case, the long-hidden darkness in the medical world was gradually coming to light." "Good morning, Emma." Hearing small footsteps coming down the stairs, I turned to find my daughter standing there with a still sleepy face. Almost 2 years old now. Though she used to be shy, she now beams with a full smile when she sees Amy. "You have your piano recital today, don't you?" The church music teacher was the first to discover Emma's talent. Many people are moved by the sight of her playing the piano so accurately, despite her small hands. "Margaret, look at this," Amy handed me a newspaper. On the social page was news that Thomas's parole application had been denied. Helen had fallen seriously ill while serving her sentence and was being treated in the prison hospital ward. Jessica was participating in a rehabilitation program and writing letters of apology to victims. We have to accept the past as it is. Looking out at the garden, spring sunlight was filtering through the trees. A season of new beginnings. The doorbell rang. Members of the Mother's Support Group. They had started gathering at my house every Sunday afternoon. Mothers with similar experiences. Important time to share experiences and support each other. Dr. Wilson, thank you for having us again today. It had been 6 months since I started hosting the group. I had obtained counseling qualifications and was gradually becoming able to help people in similar situations. Margaret, watch this. Emma shows a serious expression at the piano. Her small fingers gently caress the keys. Mozart's lullaby begins to flow through the room. Outside the window, spring breeze swayed the garden flowers. In the rose bushes, small birds were busy building nests. Hey Emma, would you like to read the letter from Grandma? A letter from my grandmother, my mother. After the incident, she began writing regularly. Sometimes with mementos from the past. Margaret, Amy says quietly. Your strength is saving many people. The Mother's Support Program already counts over 50 participants. Mothers who have suffered deep emotional wounds. But their eyes held a definite light of hope. Hey, Mama, Emma suddenly asks. Are you happy? To that question, I answered without hesitation. Yes, very much so. Weekend afternoons. Conversations with Mother's Support Group members. Friendship with Amy. Emma's growth. And a new mission. In a corner of the room hangs a photograph. A newspaper clipping reporting the case. The headline reads, Justice Prevails. It was a record of our battle, and also proof of hope. Can I play the piano? Yes, of course. Mozart's melody begins to flow through the room again. Someone softly starts humming along. Soon, it spreads throughout the room. Like a song of hope. Outside the window, the magnolia flowers were in full bloom. As if announcing the beginning of a new season. Looking at Emma's profile, I smiled quietly. Life sometimes presents unexpected trials. But there's always light beyond them. I knew this from personal experience. And now, our new story has only just begun.